The notice lands on a Tuesday, abrupt and unceremonious. There is no warning, no discreet phone call, no quiet effort to handle things behind palace walls. Instead, a severe black-edged document is fastened flat against the heavy oak door of the heritage cottage at Sandringham, secured by a single strip of official red seal tape. It is the sort of seal everyone on royal property recognizes immediately, the kind that comes from only one office and is never ignored. At 6:47 that morning, a groundskeeper named Darnell walks past and sees it. His breath hangs in the icy Norfolk air as he slows, reads the heading, and instantly understands that something serious has shifted. He does not touch the paper. He simply lifts his phone, takes one quick photo, and heads off in the opposite direction. In 23 years on those grounds, he has learned one hard rule. When a document bears that seal, you do not involve yourself. By 7:15, 3 more staff members have seen it. By 8:00, whispers are sliding through Sandringham's back corridors with the speed and silence of electricity. Everyone knows the cottage in question is not just another estate building. For the past 2 years, it has quietly served as a base for a series of commercial activities that were never formally approved. And somewhere, someone with real authority has finally decided to call time on it. At the center of the storm is Tom Parker Bowles, Queen Camilla's son, and through marriage, King Charles III's stepson. For years, Tom has cultivated the image of Britain's genial, well-connected food critic, the kind of polished public figure who seems equally at ease in glossy magazine interviews, television appearances, and high-profile dinner rooms. He is not a working royal, has no official title, and carries no constitutional power inside the palace structure. But the issue now confronting the family is that, by all appearances, he had been moving through parts of that world as though those distinctions no longer applied to him. Reports attributed to estate-linked sources, and cited by publications including the Daily Mail and the Telegraph, suggest that private invitation-only culinary events and consulting-style gatherings were repeatedly held on duchy-adjacent land, property that carries clear legal restrictions under the Crown estate framework. The Duchy of Cornwall, now controlled by Prince William, spans around 135,000 acres across England and Wales, and is valued at more than £1.2 billion. On land like that, there is no such thing as casual use. Every building, pathway, and acre sits within an ownership structure backed by legal status and precedent. Eventually, the person responsible for that structure appears to have started asking exactly who had been using what. That is what makes this so much bigger than an awkward family dispute in expensive surroundings. A sealed and formally served royal eviction notice does not appear by accident, and it certainly does not emerge from a brief flare of irritation. It is the final product of a process, one that is usually slow, evidential, and ruthlessly methodical. William is not known for acting first and asking questions later. The image circulating that morning of him in a blue suit, jaw firm, finger lifted as though issuing a final warning, is not the image of a man losing his temper. It is the image of a man who has already made up his mind, reviewed the file, and signed off. This was never about one cottage or one event. The monarchy may present itself publicly as a family, but internally it remains an institution governed by charters, budgets, land law, and centuries of precedent. When protected royal land is used commercially without permission, that is not a breach of etiquette. It is a legal issue. And when the heir to the throne responds not with a quiet family phone call but with a sealed notice on the door, he is making a point far beyond real estate. The message is blunt. Informal privilege has reached its limit. To understand why William appears to be moving this way, it helps to look at the atmosphere around King Charles himself. At 76, Charles is carrying the burden of a health reality the palace has worked hard to contain in public. His recent appearances have been noticeably adjusted. Engagements are shorter, gaps for recovery are longer, and the schedule that once seemed immovable has been subtly reshaped. Buckingham Palace has described these changes as routine, but those close to the king reportedly know they are anything but. When Charles's cancer diagnosis was confirmed in February 2024, the palace offered only limited detail. The type of cancer was not disclosed, but the phrase that dominated official communication was that he would step back temporarily from public duties. That single word, temporarily, became the anchor for months of carefully managed reassurance. Yet in royal life, when the monarch's health becomes uncertain, the system around him does not simply pause. Authority begins to shift in quieter ways. Advisors recalibrate, loyalties drift, and the heir starts carrying responsibilities that may not yet have been formally announced. William, by all accounts, absorbed that weight with the steadiness of someone who had expected it all along. He had spent his life watching his father wait. Charles spent 73 years as heir, longer than anyone in British history, standing one step behind power and preparing for a role that often seemed destined to stay just out of reach. Through that prolonged wait, he built charities, championed environmental causes before they were fashionable, and immersed himself in architecture, farming, and faith with the seriousness of a man determined to fill delayed destiny with meaningful work. Historians have often noted the discipline with which he endured those decades of preparation. But as soon as the throne finally arrived, his health began to complicate the picture. That changing reality mattered because the Duchy of Cornwall passed to William in May 2023 with Charles's accession, and the duchy is no symbolic inheritance. It is a working financial and legal institution made up of farms, estates, heritage properties, and major revenue. William appears to have treated it exactly that way from the first day. He reportedly brought in advisors, ordered broad compliance reviews, and began checking the informal arrangements that had accumulated over years of relaxed assumptions, social proximity, and the sort of access that often thrives when no one is inclined to challenge it. What emerged from those reviews is believed to be what set all of this in motion. Tom Parker Bowles, from the outside, does not seem like a man expecting scrutiny. By several accounts, he moved through the estate with the easy confidence of someone long accustomed to belonging. There was the familiar nod to staff, the easy wave to groundskeepers, and the habit of parking in the south courtyard close to the main service entrance rather than in areas used by visitors or ordinary staff. The picture, according to those watching, was of a man who had become comfortable enough that the geography itself seemed to bend toward his convenience. None of that would matter much if Tom were simply an amiable guest. And by most public standards, he is more than amiable. He is widely seen as charming, polished, and professionally accomplished. His career as a food writer is real, his books sell, and his television work has made him a familiar face. In another setting, he might simply be viewed as a successful broadcaster and author benefiting from talent and family name in equal measure. But within royal life, optics are inseparable from legality, and that is where the trouble begins. Before Camilla married Charles, Ray Mill House in Wiltshire, which she owned privately, had reportedly become something of an informal center for Tom's growing culinary brand. Sources cited by Radar Online and the Telegraph described events presented as private gatherings that allegedly resembled commercial consulting arrangements in practice. Guest lists were reportedly curated, money changed hands in forms described as donations or contributions, and the subtle prestige of Camilla's connection appears to have given those events an aura no independent venue could manufacture. Over time, Duchy-linked properties seem to have entered the picture as well. That matters because the Duchy of Cornwall is not just a collection of attractive homes and land. It exists under a charter dating back to 1337, established by Edward III for the heir to the throne, and the governance rules attached to it are specific. Commercial use without formal written approval is not a fuzzy area open to interpretation. It is a clear breach. According to the records later assembled, Tom's events had not received that required authorization. Access logs, delivery records, sign-ins, and security entries reportedly built a pattern that was easy to overlook individually, but difficult to deny when laid side by side. When those records were cross-checked, the picture appears to have sharpened. Over roughly 18 months, Tom Parker Bowles is said to have used Duchy-adjacent property for commercial purposes on at least 11 documented occasions. During that same period, Charles either did not know the full scale of what was happening, or, perhaps more plausibly, preferred not to look too directly at something involving Camilla's son. Charles has long spoken warmly about Tom and Laura and has repeatedly signaled genuine affection for Camilla's children since the 2005 marriage. That warmth has never really been in dispute. What is more telling is that William seems to have been recording the same pattern through a very different lens. People around him have long said that when he is truly angry, he does not become louder. He becomes still. His posture tightens almost imperceptibly, his words become fewer, and his reactions lose all softness. It is the stillness of calculation. By the middle of 2024, he had reportedly stopped making his usual coordination calls to Tom's team. On Tom's side, that change was apparently dismissed as diary congestion. It was not. Tom may have been treating the estate like a family inheritance passed along through affection. William, from all indications, was treating it like a legal problem already under investigation. A private photograph William is said to keep offers another clue to the emotional architecture beneath all of this. The image is not part of palace archives or official portrait releases. It is reportedly kept in a private room, away from cameras, where it escapes the curated storytelling of royal life. In it, a young blonde boy stands laughing in a garden while his mother rests one hand lightly on his shoulder. Not posed, not performative, just present. Diana. To understand William's cold precision now, many royal observers believe it is impossible to ignore what Diana represents inside him. She died in Paris on August 31, 1997, when William was 15. He stood before her coffin in a public ritual of mourning that turned private devastation into national spectacle. In the years that followed, he built a public self defined by restraint, composure, and controlled distance. He learned how to function as the polished future of an institution that had once failed the person he loved most. That history still shadows the present. His relationship with Camilla has therefore always existed in a careful space. He has not publicly humiliated her or displayed overt hostility in any documented sense. He has attended engagements with her, stood beside Charles when palace optics required family unity, and understood better than almost anyone the difference between private feeling and public obligation. But public discipline is not the same as emotional forgetting. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams has often noted that William communicates loyalty structurally rather than theatrically. He reveals it through decisions, through who is included, who is excluded, whose names appear in official briefings, and whose breaches are quietly acted upon. In that light, the Parker Bowles' presence on Duchy land was not merely an estate issue. It became symbolic of something deeper and older. William watched his mother's institutional standing eroded over time, her presence managed, her role reduced, even as public love for her expanded beyond the palace's control. Now, as heir, he is looking at another family orbit inside the monarchy's emotional architecture, one benefiting from informal access on royal land, and he appears to have decided that silence is no longer an option. The decisive file itself was reportedly underwhelming in appearance. Gray, slim, government standard, marked only with a reference number and a date stamp from the Duchy of Cornwall legal office. But when William's lead advisor, a precise estate governance specialist named Camilla, placed it on the conference table at Kensington Palace, the reaction in the room was anything but minor. She had spent more than a decade handling disputes involving vast sums and complicated land arrangements, yet this thinner file carried unusual gravity. The compliance audit that produced it had begun 6 months earlier as part of William's broader review of Duchy properties. On paper, the assignment was routine: verify access, confirm usage agreements, and check whether any commercial activity on protected land had received proper written approval. Most audits of that kind end in dense paperwork and little drama. This one ended in 11 incidents. The legal framework is key. Commercial activity on Duchy-adjacent property requires written authorization from the Duchy Governance Board, which has operated under William's authority since Charles's coronation. Because of the Duchy's unique tax and legal status, the oversight expectations are not looser than those on ordinary private property. If anything, they are stricter. Unauthorized use creates exposure not only for the person staging the activity, but also for the institution that failed to stop it. Every undocumented delivery, every event tied to fees or consulting, every commercial use of royal-linked land without approval potentially increased that exposure. Camilla's team reportedly broke the pattern into 11 one-page summaries over an 18-month span. Each page listed the date, the nature of the event, the relevant logs, and the authorization status. The same word appeared every time in that final column: none. William read the file in 40 minutes and, according to accounts of the meeting, did so without visible reaction. That silence mattered more than an outburst would have. People who work close to power often know that stillness can be the strongest response in the room. When he finished, he placed both hands on the table, looked at Camilla, and said, "Prepare the notice." Not a notice. The notice, as if the decision had already existed before the paperwork caught up with it. The legal team then worked through the weekend. The final document was drafted under Duchy governance provisions, citing the access violations by reference number. It was reviewed by senior solicitors, signed, sealed, and eventually fixed to the cottage door. On that Tuesday morning in March 2026, Darnell saw not the beginning of a scandal, but the visible endpoint of a long internal process. What neither the legal team nor perhaps even William himself could fully contain was what happened after the notice was served. Once the press got hold of it, the matter stopped being a quiet legal correction and became a public declaration. The practical consequences began quickly. Crates were brought in, logos were removed, equipment was packed up, and the activity that had once moved through the Sandringham cottage with apparent comfort was dismantled under a gray sky. Yet the larger confrontation was still to come, and it reportedly unfolded not in a corridor or office but in the king's private library. Camilla was already there when William arrived. She had chosen the chair nearest the fireplace, a subtle but telling detail in a world where seating still signals status and confidence. She sat upright, coat buttoned to the neck, hands folded, expression controlled. It was the posture of a woman who had survived decades of public storms and expected to survive this one too. William entered without knocking. No tie, gray suit, folder under his arm, no smile, and no attempt at small talk. He crossed the room, took the chair opposite her, and placed the folder on the table between them with quiet precision. Camilla looked down at it only briefly before meeting his eyes again. He let the silence settle for a full half-minute, and in a royal room, silence of that length is never accidental. Then he opened the file and turned it so she could read it from where she sat. Camilla had organized the summaries in reverse chronological order, with the most recent incident first. The date on the top page was from 7 weeks earlier. The location was Duchy-adjacent property in Norfolk. The authorization line read none. Camilla read it slowly, and to William that appears to have said everything. A person who truly does not know what is in a file reads differently from someone buying time. She reportedly tried to frame the events as private family gatherings. William reportedly answered with a line of chilling clarity, cutting through the euphemism and calling them what the documents showed: protected royal land used for commercial activity without written approval. 11 times. Documented. Camilla's answer was simple. He is family. In another setting, that might have softened the room. In this one, it only sharpened the divide. William waited, expression unchanged, then delivered the line that has since taken on almost mythic status in royal commentary. We are an institution, not a family business. It was the sentence that reduced the entire dispute to its core truth. Camilla reportedly reached for the telephone, likely intending to bring Charles into the conversation. For 2 decades, she had understood exactly how to use timing, tone, and the king's presence to alter difficult situations. But William stopped her with a few quiet words before the call was made. She put the phone down. The room, by then, had changed. Much of the public still sees William through the lens of composure and inheritance, the polished future king who appears to move through royal life with unnerving ease. But aides who have watched him closely have suggested that this impression is misleading. A longtime palace insider, identified in background briefings, as Josephine once described his decision-making with striking bluntness. He does not make hard choices because they are easy for him. He makes them because he has already weighed the cost of not making them and concluded it would be worse. In this case, the first cost was obvious: family fracture, public fallout, and months of headlines portraying him as cold or merciless. The second cost in his mind was institutional decay. For William, there was no comparison. He had seen too clearly what happens when boundaries inside the monarchy blur and exceptions become normal. That is why the common online framing of William as simply freezing out his stepfamily misses something crucial. This was never only personal. The violations were reportedly uncovered through a compliance process he had ordered because he believes institutions survive by discipline, not indulgence. He watched what happened when the palace failed to maintain boundaries around Diana. Informal relationships expanded into institutional influence, private arrangements blurred into public consequence, and the monarchy paid for that disorder in trust and credibility. Standing at his mother's funeral at 15, he learned that institutions cannot survive if they begin replacing rules with accommodations for the well-connected. In that sense, Tom Parker Bowles had become not merely a relative with too much access but an exception. A friendly exception, perhaps. A socially charming exception, but still an exception, and exceptions left unchallenged become precedent. That is the framework in which royal analysts such as Latasha Patton have interpreted William's move. She has argued that what the public is really watching is not a domestic disagreement, but a live demonstration of the governing instincts that may define his eventual reign. Every audit, every quiet legal correction, every clipped exchange behind palace doors functions as a preview of how a future King William might approach monarchy. The style is not theatrical. It is administrative, evidential, and cold when needed. That does not mean the emotional cost is absent. Josephine reportedly observed that there are mornings when the weight of these decisions is visible in the set of William's shoulders before a difficult meeting begins. Not uncertainty exactly, but the strain of knowing that protecting an institution often requires becoming the least popular person in the room. He appears to accept that burden because he believes the alternative is worse. The fallout for Tom was swift and deeply practical. The first van arrived at Sandringham at 7 in the morning, plain white, unmarked, and deliberately discreet. Two men in gray jackets began carrying in flat-packed crates with the kind of professional efficiency that suggests prior instruction to avoid spectacle. Tom himself was not there. At 6:43 that morning, he had received a call from his assistant, Brianna, who had managed his schedule for years and reserved a special ringtone for problems too urgent for text. She informed him that the estate had served formal correspondence and that his access authorization for the Sandringham property had been revoked effective immediately. He reportedly sat in silence long enough for her to repeat his name. He was at home, holding a coffee he had not yet raised to his lips, staring at the wall while the logic of his world rearranged itself around him. The assumption Tom appears to have carried for years was never written down, but it had been reinforced often enough to feel real. His mother's position made him safe. Her closeness to Charles, her title, her long and careful navigation of public and private royal life, all of it seems to have created a sense that there was a protective shield around him. That shield proved less durable than he imagined. By 9 o'clock, Brianna had confirmation that his service entrance code, guest clearance number, and standing delivery authorization had all been deactivated. By 10, a formal letter from the Duchy of Cornwall legal office had reached his personal address, listing all 11 documented violations and giving him 48 hours to remove commercial equipment, branded materials, and personal property from the affected sites. 48 hours is not a courtesy window. It is the legal equivalent of a closed door. Tom contacted his solicitor, Darius, who asked the most important question immediately. Had any of the relevant events been approved in writing by the Duchy Governance Board? Tom's silence was reportedly enough. Darius advised full compliance and made clear that the Duchy's legal footing was strong. No fight, no press strategy, no attempt to reverse the decision through private palace channels. By the next day, the operation was already being stripped away. Branded panels near the service entrance were removed and wrapped in paper. Catering tools were inventoried. Linen, menus, and all the visible markers of a commercial enterprise operating in borrowed royal glow were packed into the unmarked van. When it finally pulled away for the last time, Darnell crossed the same route again and glanced at the cottage door. The notice was gone. In its place was bare oak, nothing more, as though the estate had already absorbed and erased the disruption. But by then, the scandal had moved far beyond the property itself. The press had it. Once that happened, the story stopped being about access codes and equipment removal and became something else entirely. A fight over image, legitimacy, and who gets to stand comfortably in the monarchy's shadow. By Thursday morning, the story had exploded across the media landscape, not in the careful, measured language of palace communications, but in the raw, hyperactive style of modern celebrity coverage. Social media threads amassed enormous engagement. American breakfast television turned it into a running drama. British tabloids splashed dramatic side-by-side images of William's stern expression and Tom Parker Bowles's now-cleared cottage door. In the United Kingdom, reactions split almost exactly as royal controversies always do. Some readers saw vindication, confirmation that Camilla's family had been operating too freely for too long, and that someone with real authority had finally put a stop to it. Others saw cruelty, a future king publicly humiliating the son of the woman who had spent 2 decades trying to steady an unconventional royal family. Both readings contained truth, which is precisely why the story caught fire. It was not simple. It was emotional, structural, and impossible to flatten into one clean narrative. In the United States, the framing took on a sharper celebrity news edge. One broadcaster used the phrase royal squatting, and it stuck because it instantly translated the complexities of a state law into a visual phrase anyone could understand. A man used a property that was not his. The heir learned of it. The heir acted. Analysts like Latasha Patton repeated across television appearances that this was not merely family drama blown up by palace politics. It was a demonstration, deliberate and legally grounded, of what kind of monarchy William appears to be preparing to run. Perhaps the most telling part of the entire media cycle was Buckingham Palace's silence. No denial, no clarification, no attempt to soften the edges. In royal life, silence often functions as a statement of its own. William has long seemed to believe, much like Queen Elizabeth did, that institutions reveal themselves most clearly through what they do and refuse to explain. For many watching, the photographs from those days changed something. William no longer looked only like the grieving son polished into duty by tragedy. He looked like a king-in-waiting already exercising the habits of rule. Weeks later, in his office at Kensington Palace, another file reportedly sat on his desk, even thinner than the one Camilla first delivered. Palace insiders have quietly referred to the larger philosophy behind it as Operation Menai Bridge, a name evoking the bridge that connects mainland Wales to Anglesey, a structure built to bear weight and withstand storms over centuries. Whether William himself has ever used the term remains unknown, but the symbolism fits. The issue is no longer one cottage or one step-sibling dispute. The issue is transition, structure, and the architecture of the reign that may come next. The Sandringham cottage has since been reassigned through proper channels. A new tenant was reportedly approved, paperwork completed, access credentials issued, and the change made with the kind of clean efficiency William appears to value. More importantly, the broader framework now said to be guiding his decisions is less a formal policy than a governing instinct. The monarchy he expects to inherit, according to those familiar with his approach, cannot survive on old informal arrangements, whispered understandings, or relationship-based exceptions that flourished under softer oversight. Charles remains king, and William has shown no sign of challenging that reality. His loyalty to his father is not the issue. But loyalty to a father and loyalty to an institution are different things, and William appears to have learned, in the hardest way possible, that confusing them can destabilize everything. That may be why the eviction notice on Tom Parker Bowles's door matters so much beyond its immediate scandal value. It was not designed as theater, though it became that. It was not crafted for humiliation, though humiliation followed. It was designed to be correct, backed by law, procedure, and documentation. And in a system built on the difference between what is allowed and what is merely tolerated, being correct can be the strongest move of all. Since the 48-hour deadline expired, there has reportedly been no formal Parker Bowles access to Duchy property. Tom has said nothing publicly. Camilla has continued her official schedule with impeccable composure. The palace has maintained total silence on the specifics, and that silence in its own way says everything. A family that spent years positioning itself comfortably inside royal orbit has now been repositioned by legal documents, deactivated access, and a blank cottage door. William is said to have returned to his desk, opened a second file, and looked over a list of additional properties under compliance review. No speech, no cameras, no dramatic public scene. Just paperwork process and a man determined to close every loophole he believes the institution can no longer afford. That is what this story may ultimately be about. Not just conflict, not just celebrity scandal, not even only royal drama, but the colder mechanics of power. For those who confused welcome with ownership, tolerance with permanence, and family ties with institutional permission, the gates have begun to close. And if this is indeed the model William is building, then what happened at that Sandringham cottage may not be the exception at all. It may be the template for everything that comes next.